أعوذ بالله من شر الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah everyone. I wanted to welcome each and every one of you to this second episode of our podcast. Joining us today will be Seyed Husayn Razavi from the East Coast. Sayed, it is good to have you with us once again.
Likewise, Sayed, thank you for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be here with you again.
Sayed, if you could just begin, I know this is not the first time on this podcast, but if you could just begin with a brief introduction of yourself.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen bil qasim al-Mustafa Muhammad. Wa ala ahli bayt al-tayyibin al-tahirin. First off, brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I hope everyone is safe and healthy in these turbulent times that we're in. Inshallah, may you always be under the protection and safety of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Ahlul Bayt. Just as a brief introduction, my name is Seyed Husayn Razavi. I'm born and raised in New Jersey. Went to school here, went to college here, studied in Rutgers University. Then I moved to Iran for a couple of years, studied in Qom for about 8-9 years, and I've been back here for the last 3 years in New Jersey. And alhamdulillah, here with my family, with my kids, busy with programs, lecturing, translating, teaching classes. So alhamdulillah, that's a brief introduction. I think that should suffice.
Alhamdulillah. How are you doing with the coronavirus? Is that affecting the massages on the East Coast as well?
Yes, I mean, everything is closed. Everything is, we're having virtual programs. There's no in-person activities yet. So I think precaution is best right now at this time until we have a little bit more certainty what's going to be happening in the future. As you know, there's a surge in the viruses that are happening. So inshallah, Allah protect everyone. Allah, relieve us of this illness. We're looking forward to, get out of the house and be a little bit more active. The last 4 or 5 months, we've been all sort of stuck at home, not really being able to go out. So it's not good. It's not good for us, especially adults. And for the kids, it's even more challenging and more difficult. But inshallah, it's a little bit a change in pace. So inshallah, hopefully we'll get through this.
Inshallah. I'm sure inshallah it'll be over soon. And I'm really looking forward to opening up the massages again. And that's the biggest thing that I've been missing, actually, is just, especially during Shahr Ramadan, just not being able to gather with the brothers and sisters. It was very different from what I was used to just from all these years. But alhamdulillah, sometimes Allah takes something away so that we recognize the value of what we've been taking for granted as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's a book by Shaheed Sadr, or a series of lectures by Shaheed Sadr, Shaheed Muhammad Baqir Sadr, As-Sunan At-Tarikhiyya. And so he talks about the different trends in history. So he talks about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in humanity, because humanity tends to stray away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So certain events Allah causes to happen so that they're forced to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And it's possible very much so that this event is like that, this event, this pandemic that we're going through, because before this pandemic, we were all living our lives. So perhaps it's a reminder, it's a divine message for us to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and remind ourselves who's actually administering this entire universe, right? So, inshallah, hopefully we can make the most of it. And we pray hopefully the month of Muharram, things will get better and, we can continue having our programs. So yeah, Ramadan was tough, not having the programs, not seeing the brothers, not praying together. So inshallah, hopefully we pray that by Muharram time, things will improve.
Inshallah. Ameen. So say the topic for tonight was an interesting topic. And I know we had some back and forth before, but the topic for tonight is marriage. And we're hoping to cast a pretty wide net tonight and to really go into a number of different topics related to marriage. So I just want to open this up, inshallah, by just kind of beginning with this question of why is it that marriage is so emphasized in Islam? Because, on one hand, I think we understand that, okay, well, there is psychological, there's physical, and there's emotional needs that every human being has. But when we look at Islam as a religion, it seems to have a very high focus on the importance of marriage, to the point where, for example, we have traditions which say that the prayers of a married person are, for example, 70 times the value of someone who is single. And so I just wanted to see if you could just open this up of why is it that Islam puts such a focus on this institution of marriage?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Like you said, marriage is a very important institution. Every human being requires marriage, not only for their physical and psychological needs, but also for their spiritual needs. And perhaps this is one of the reasons why Islam has emphasized marriage so much. Yes, the psychological, the physical, all those are needed. But what I want to try to redefine marriage in a manner from a traditional understanding. Well, we have a family, we have kids, we procreate, we leave our legacy. But I want to sort of perhaps Islam tries to emphasize this a lot because of a spiritual perspective which is there in marriage. See, we're all in a journey in our lives. We're all moving in our lives. We're going from point A to point B to point C. So we human beings, we're in a constant journey. And we have to determine what that journey is in our lives. As Muslims, as believers in the Prophet, believers in the Quran, lovers of the Ahlul Bayt, we are told that our journey is towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever decisions that we make, whatever actions that we do, whatever behaviors we undertake, they should all be leading us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in this journey that we undertake to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we require some help, we require some assistance. Because we want to reach those spiritual heights, we want to arrive at those lofty aspirations. So we as human beings, we're moving towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we require a partner with us to help us, to aid us, and that not only so that we may be helped, but also so we can also help them. See, we human beings, we're composed of different parts. According to some of the commentaries that are out there, a human being has something which is called the ana al-malakutiyya, which is the part of the self, the component of a human being, which is associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is associated with coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is attracted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which wants to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this ana malakutiyya, it has no ego, it has no individuality, it only wants to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Opposed to this is the ana tabi'iyya. And this ana tabi'iyya is the part of the human being which is associated with the physical dimension. These two are always in a constant struggle with one another, right? The ana malakutiyya is calling us towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the ana at-tabi'iyya is calling us towards materialism, calling us towards physical pleasures, right? And the ana at-tabi'iyya, there's different parts in it. There's the aql, the intellect, there's ghariza, the instincts which are there, and there are muyul. The most important part of this ana at-tabi'iyya is something which is called hubb al-dhat, the love of oneself. Every human being, they love themselves. We all love ourselves. We all love our lives. We all love our existence. A child, from the time a child is born, that child loves themselves. And so as a child grows, as an individual, as a person grows, that ghariza, that instinct for self-love, it becomes more and more intense and more powerful, right? And so what happens is, when they reach a certain point, right, that ghariza which is there, it needs to be broken down. It needs to be shedded. It needs to be discarded. And this is what marriage is. Marriage is when you surpass your own self, when you break your own self to take on another person, to take on another partner in your journey. Now you're living with that person, you're spending time with that person, right? Now you're in this journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this manner. So this is what, from a spiritual perspective, what marriage is. Where we're taking a human being from self-love to loving another individual in order to arrive at that destination, right? And this is what marriage is supposed to do. Marriage is supposed to break that very selfish love of oneself and include another person so that they can travel, they can move to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Sayyid, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people, when they're getting married, the perspective that they have, especially being raised in the West, is a little bit different, right? So this is the more Islamic perspective, the spiritual perspective. But I think for a lot of people, the perspective tends to be that I am getting married really to increase my own stature, right? That, for
Yeah.
example, that now I have the stature as a married individual. That, for example, others can look up to me because I have a family, right? I have a wife. In some cases, we see that people, for example, they try to get very attractive wives as a means of even boosting their own, right? In the West, they call it trophy wives, and in a means of almost boosting themselves in the eyes of the society. So it's a little bit interesting because we're juxtaposing these 2 points. That on one hand, you have this very religious perspective of actually maybe getting rid of that self-love, and then on the other hand, we have people that marriage to them is a means of actually going the opposite direction.
Yeah, a lot of times marriage is so that a person can love themselves more, right? When they look to get married, they want to see somebody who can serve them and serve their own interests, right? So it's a lot of times people's approach when they get married is, what do I get out of this?
Right.
I get, for example, financial aid, financial assistance. I get comfort. I get, a home. I get companionship. I'm no longer, lonely. I'm no longer in solitude. I'm able to spend my time, right? So it's a very selfish form, right? And that's not the right approach. Instead of thinking, what can I give to somebody? What can I offer to somebody? And move towards Allah in this manner. It's unfortunately that approach and that perspective is it's a very detrimental. When it comes to an Islamic perspective, where we're spiritual beings, traversing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
It's interesting, and we'll get to this later, inshallah, as well. But when we look at the number of divorces, if you look at this very kind of Mimi-centric approach to marriage, and then we're looking at these rising divorces, and we're trying to figure out, why is this happening? I think this is one of the factors that we can maybe figure into that equation, that the reason why so much divorce is taking place is people are entering into these relationships with an eye towards serving themselves rather than, for example, serving the partner as a means of getting closer to Allah.
Yeah, I mean, we live in this modern era that we live in. We have sort of a kuburawi problem, a macro problem, which is an individualistic worldview. Everybody is focused only upon what they're getting, instead of being concerned what they can give is what is in it for me, right? And that's why we find, like, even in Aqaid, we have like new topics that what is the purpose of religion, what is the need of religion. I mean, these were like in Kalam Jadid, this has become something new, because this modern era it's all about human beings. What benefit do I get in believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Human has become the central point, right? In their existence, and this is completely contradictory to what Islam teaches us, right? Where the center point in our lives is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how are we moving towards him.
Right. That's a beautiful point, Sayed. One of the things I wanted to move into at this time is there are, especially talking to the youth, they mention a lot of difficulties that they're undergoing as a result of trying to get married. And that's kind of one of the main things that people will talk about, is all of these different issues that they're faced, especially in the modern day world, especially in the West, that they're trying to kind of resolve. So I wanted to kind of go into a few of these different points. The first point that just came up was this issue of late marriages. And we've seen a trend amongst parents that the kids are willing to get married. They're ready to get married, but there's a push from the parents. The parents are saying, well, you have to first finish university. And then usually for the men, after you finish university, you have to get a job. And then usually even the job isn't enough. They have to have kind of a high paying job before they can go for that process of khastagari and have the other side kind of even consider them, right? They're going to get kicked out if they don't have a good enough job. So we're looking at all of these aspects. Do you think that this is a necessity, that, for example, people do need to finish their university before getting married? They do need to get a very good, stable job? Or is this something that we've picked up in an incorrect way?
I mean, everyone has a different situation, and every situation is circumstantial, right? So I mean, there's no blanket ruling that we can give. So I mean, everybody has to determine their situation. But the society that we live in, A person is forced to, whatever reasons, they're forced to get married at an earlier age because of the amount of stimulation, the amount of images, the amount of things which are happening. Unfortunately, there are a lot of expectations that when a person wants to get married, that they should be a college graduate, that they should, have a job. In some cases, that they should have, X amount of money saved up. They should have a home. But these are all expectations that we sort of put into marriage, right? When it comes to finding somebody and getting married, like one of the beautiful stories in the Quran was the daughter of Nabi Shu'aib, when she comes across Prophet Musa. And I mean, I mentioned this before, but I mean, it's just a beautiful story that Nabi Musa, he had nothing, but Nabi Shu'aib, actually even his daughter actually saw Nabi Musa as somebody who's hardworking, somebody who's strong, somebody who's trustworthy. And so she sees these qualities in a person who's a fugitive, who's run away from a country, who shares a different culture, right? He was from Egypt, right? And this Madain was in a different part, right? So their languages, their cultures, their customs, all of these things were different. But because those qualities and those characteristics were there, Nabi Shu'aib went and approached Nabi Musa and said that, I want you to marry one of my daughters, right? I mean, that story right there, it really captures the Islamic spirit of when it comes to marriage. That when people are Islamically mature, I'm not talking about bulugh, but when they're in their thought, when they're Islamically mature, right? When they're mature enough to become independent with one another, they're able to support one another to the best ability and extent that they can. It's recommended that they do go and that they get married, right? Instead of delaying it unnecessarily, right? And that delay of marriage, it causes a lot of problems, right? One of the problems it causes is that a person goes towards haram things, right? A person, starts talking to people, to nah-mahram, who they shouldn't be talking to, right? They start interacting with people who they shouldn't be interacting with, right? The eyes begin to wander. They look at things which are inappropriate. So, I mean, I think it's really good that even if we can on a community level, encourage the youth to get married at an age where they're Islamically mature in their thoughts, right? That's really important. Sometimes, there's some cases where people, they tell their kids to get married at 17 and 18 years of age. The boy is 17, the girl is 16, right? They may, do muta for a few years, but the boy is not at a level of Islamic maturity, right? He has some physical needs which he needs to fulfill, and so the parents think that the easiest way out for them is to get married, right? In this case, marriage should be delayed. That child, that boy who's there, you should reach a level of Islamic maturity, and after that point, go and pursue marriage.
I think one of the things parents don't realize, and this is an issue that relates more so to, I think, immigrant parents more so than parents who have been raised here, but I think it's difficult for parents to exactly understand just how much haram takes place in this society.
Yeah.
I'm sure if our parents, for example, if they knew exactly the kinds of things which were going on in high school, the kinds of things which were going on in college, it's doubtful that they would have let us, for example, enter into these environments. And I think this is a reality. Parents don't realize just the sheer amount of haram that their kids are being faced with. It's very different from that village or that city back in the Middle East, right? Completely different. I think today the average age in the United States that someone is getting into a physical relationship is right around 13 or 14 years old.
Yeah.
Right? They've looked at these and they've kind of done polling and statistics. They found that the average age is about 13 or 14 when people are getting into physical relationships.
Yeah.
Right. Another issue is the access to adult videos, which I think, people who are not raised here, they don't realize just how easy access is to these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right now, I would say a child that's 8 years old, 9 years old, because they're so well versed with the internet, right? They have so much access to the internet, and they know what they're doing in terms of searching. It's very easy for them that if they become curious about an issue, they can very easily search about that, and then they begin to fall into things which I'm sure their parents would never imagine even exist.
Mm. No, that's 100% right. I mean, one of the interesting comparisons is that, when we were kids, when we were growing up, inside our homes, it was a sort of a safe base. Nothing haram would come into our homes. But the situation is such that whether we like it or not, haram has now penetrated within our homes. Now it's the situation is that sometimes we may not even be looking for something, from something wicked or evil or polluted, but a pop-up comes up. You watch a YouTube video, and recommended videos they come up, right? So first, the home environment is also no longer a safe place for a child to be, right? I mean, the Quran emphasizes a lot that وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ, that a person protects their private parts, and you mentioned a very important point that young people, people of even all ages, they watch pornographic material. They go watch those type of videos which are inappropriate, and it's become completely shameless. The day and age that we live in, it's a very shameless time, very shameless era where immodesty is prevalent, and unfortunately immodesty has become something which they take pride of. And if somebody is acting in a modest manner, they look down upon that person. They look at that person as somebody who's insecure, somebody who's shy, somebody who doesn't know their self-worth. And unfortunately, this is what these type of material, these type of pornographic material, these videos, that's what they promote. They promote filth. And when a person starts watching those type of things, it corrupts their mind. It completely consumes their ideas and their thoughts, and it makes them think in a very perverted manner. Corrupt ideas, corrupt thoughts. The mind is polluted, and it's constantly straying towards those things which are deviated, those things which are depraved, right? The mind literally becomes poisoned, right? Not only that, but it also it kills a person's spirituality, right? Your connection with Allah, your prayers, your du'as, your Quran. A person has no desire, because to do those type of divine and religious activities, because they've lowered themselves to a material being, right? That spiritual aspect they've completely erased it, right?
I don't want to scare parents, but a lot of times parents will see that when their kids reach a teenage age, they start to kind of drift away from religion. Now, I'm not saying this is the case, every single time, right? Because there's different situations. But sometimes the reason that the teenager begins to drift is that they're getting involved in a number of sins. And as a result of those sins, shaitan gets to work on them. That, for example, you're a sinner, you're not worthy of doing your prayers, you're not worthy of fasting. And so they use those sins to draw a wedge between that young individual who used to be religious, in order to push them away from Islam.
Yeah, and I mean, the situation is compounded with with social media, with even like 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, they have cell phones, right? Their classmates, they have cell phones, and they're all connected to 5G and internet, and they're watching videos, and and they're showing one another, and poor kid has no desire to do these type of things, but it's he or she, they're being exposed to these type of things. And it occupies their mind, it occupies their thoughts. A very destructive, unfortunate phenomena that we live in.
Sayed, that reminds me of a story that one time when I was studying in Qom, we left on a trip. We went to the south of Iran, and we would go down there, and from time to time we would there would be like, you'd help build like schools and masjids and things, and these really tiny villages where they didn't have a school, for example. It was maybe a village of 150, 200 people. And I remember one day we were, the work had finished, and one of the young kids, who might have been 12 years old, he brings a cell phone. Now, I gotta mention this point, that this place was not a place that had landline internet. Like, the homes did not have computers, anything like that. But everyone had a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Literally, village in the middle of nowhere, and this young 12-year-old kid, he brings up his cell phone, and he shows, and it was basically an X-rated video or picture, and he shows it to one of the brothers. He says, is this haram? And he just didn't know. It wasn't that he was being audacious or whatever. He literally didn't know that he had come across these kinds of things, and he was trying to figure out what is this, and what is like the Islamic aspect of this. And obviously he can't go ask his parents or his uncles or whatever, right? So he had come and he was asking one of the shuyukh, and they told him, yeah, this is haram, and they had to sit down with him and explain. And to me, it just juxtaposed this idea that there is no longer any safe space, right? There is no longer any safe place. And yeah, education is huge, that parents need to educate their children in regards to what is halal and haram. But even beyond this, that is only going to protect your child for so long. Because at the end of the day, you could teach them right from wrong, but the pressure is going to be enough in the society that when they do reach, for example, high school is finished, or even within high school, they're not going to be able to contain themselves. And I know most parents, they have this idea that it's not going to be my child.
Yeah, they're in denial, complete denial.
You hear
Arabic
this all the time.
speaking.
No. Hamoudi is different. Hassan is different. No, not my. But really, we're all human beings. Every
Yeah.
single human being, they have desires. And then when you put them into that kind of pressure, the chance of them coming out clean is very low.
Yeah. And a lot of times when parents find out about this, they think the solution is marriage.
Mm-hmm.
They think, oh, my child is doing these haram things, watching these type of illicit material, and so they think that let me get my child married very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't realize that a corrupt mind, if that child gets married, the marriage will also become corrupt, right? It won't end the child's problems, right? Like it'll actually may lead to even more dissatisfaction, right? A person, inshallah we'll talk about this later on, but a person needs to fix themselves up before they go and they get married, right? I mean, their minds and their thoughts have become habituated to a very glamorized series of events which has no reality, and then when they go and they get married, they're left unsatisfied, right? I mean, they're going through major spiritual ailments, and marriage is not the solution for that person, right? I mean, there are solutions which are out there. I mean, they need to go and protect themselves. They need to protect their thoughts. They need to reach a level of purity before they go and they get married again. Otherwise, that marriage is going to fail, right? I mean, maybe at another time we can talk about what are some ways that we can encourage the youth to stay away. What are the harmful effects? The objectification of women. They become consumers. I mean, this industry which is there. I mean, I didn't look it up, but it's probably $1 billion industry. The amount of money that they're making, and it's so glamorized, and they're also protected by like worker rights. So I mean, we need to understand that those are huge dangers that are there, and if we don't take those things into consideration, it's going to lead to toxicity in a person's mind. It's going to lead to toxicity in a person's relationship and marriage, and down the line, there's serious repercussions that are there.
It was interesting. I was reading an article on this just recently that, these kinds of, for example, adult videos, it literally rewires the individual's brain, right? It rewires the way that they see the world. It rewires the way that they perceive, for example, women or men in the case of the opposite gender. And that's huge, because that can have consequences that it's not like someone's going to say, okay, well, I'm going to stop and it's going to be over. No, those consequences, depending on how long the behavior has been going on, it can continue as well. And so, just like, let me throw this out, just like drug abuse, right? So somebody may be abusing drugs.
Yeah.
They're abusing drugs, and as a result, yeah, they can stop, they can quit. There's going to be damage though. Right? And depending if, for example, someone has been an addict, let's say for 5 years, for 10 years, right? That damage is going to, it's going to get cured. It's going to get healed eventually, but we have to realize that it's going to take a period of time. It's not going to be overnight.
Yeah. And they don't come out of there, unscathed, they become, they're going through major injuries, I mean, it's best to talk to kids about this. All parents need to talk to their kids about this and warn them about this. That this is a serious problem that people are going through. I mean, even in the video games, right? There's problems there. Even in like some of the kids' books, these type of ideas, these type of thoughts are coming up. Something that really need to be parents need to be aware of, and communities also need to discuss this and provide an outlet. I mean, one of the things that I can give as advice is, make sure that, parents, are monitoring the social media and the mobile, the laptop, see what they're doing, make sure like the laptop is in like a public area, out in maybe in the kitchen area. I mean, kids are sitting in there on the laptops and, all night long, they're watching these things, and parents are unfortunately they're in denial about this. And
we mentioned this last time. Don't bring them to us when they're like 25 years old. We can't fix it. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's right.
Right. Somebody asked a question on another platform. They said, what is Islamic maturity and what age? What is the definition that you're giving? I just wanted to clarify that point, that in Islam we have two concepts. We have one concept which is bulugh, which is basically physical maturity, right? And there's certain signs for that, but it's when someone reaches sexual maturity. And then there's, typically, sometimes, this could be reached at the same time, but typically there's a gap when they reach mental maturity as well. And mental maturity is when they are mature enough where they can, for example, have a grasp on their own affairs, right? They can take care of themselves to some degree. Now, obviously, you're not going to have a 17, 18-year-old, acting like a 30-year-old. So that's not what is being defined here. But there is a level of maturity that you look and you say, okay, this individual is not a child anymore. This is, for example, their own person. Seyed, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something which a person themselves that they may not be able to decide, but a lot of times parents, they can pick up on this, right? They can understand that, my son, he's responsible. My daughter, she's responsible. She's ready for the next stage. He's ready for that next stage of getting married, right? So yeah, I mean, those points that you mentioned are, spot on. And that those are things which are important for a person to have before getting married. And it's a responsibility of parents to equip their children with these type of things. We have to have, as parents, we have to hold our kids to a high level of expectation that, by the age of 15, 16, they should be secure in their beliefs. They should be secure in their personalities. They should be secure about their future, right? That doesn't mean that, they know exactly what they're doing, but they should know what are the major principles that they should be abiding by in their lives, They should be knowing that, we believe in Allah and we don't do anything to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have certain values. We uphold those values, we cherish those values, and we try to become human beings who are better, who are improving, who are productive, who are giving to the community, right? So, I mean, those type of things, the responsibility lies on the parents from a young age, from the age of, 4 or 5 years of age, to instill within them that Islamic maturity. And even sometimes I tell my daughter that, and she's only 4 years old, but I just tell her once in a while that, hey, you're going to get married and go to your husband's house. Make sure you clean up your toys. Make sure you help your mom in the kitchen, right? So it's in her mind that this is the future. A person has to do this. It's not just about her growing up and going to college and university and getting a job and living her life. No, her future, a very big part of her future is having a family life, right? And that's something which Islam has emphasized. Maybe 4 is a bit too young, but
But it's a concept, right? You're introducing a concept, and it's interesting that many parents don't do this. That they're telling their kids, don't think about marriage, right? And the kid is falling into all sorts of haram and all sorts of issues. And saying, don't think about marriage, just think about your studies, just focus on your studies. And studies finish, and as a result of that lack of preparation, that person isn't ready for marriage. They might be 25 years old, they might be 23 years old. They still don't have that readiness because the parents haven't prepped them.
Yeah, absolutely. When a parent, they called me up, and their daughter, she's like 28, 29. And they said that, when they talked to her daughter about marriage, that she started crying. She's heard so many horror stories that she refuses, she refuses to get married. And that's really sad, because that, maturity hasn't come in. They're not able to rationalize that, hey, in every relationship, there are challenges, there are difficulties which are happening. So, I mean, it's important that the parents lead their child down that direction of Islamic maturity.
Yeah. Sayed, a question that was asked, I'm going to pose this to you, is, so we were talking about issues related to, for example, what's found on the internet. We were talking in regards to the circle of friends and what begins to be discussed at earlier and earlier ages. And a question that's being asked is, what are the best ways to discuss this with these children? And at what age should we have the talk? If the child is in this situation, God forbid, then what do you do, right? So there's two components. One is, what is the best age to speak to them about these issues and start to bring it up? And what do you do if you haven't had that talk and they're already kind of fallen into this kind of behavior? What is the solution here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like my son, he's 6 years old. So when he was 5, they had Valentine's Day in school. Okay. And I say, you're not going to school on Valentine's Day, I mean, I didn't tell him for Valentine's Day, but, I don't want him to get exposed to those ideas at that age. So, I mean, you can never start early enough. Like, we have to try to instill proper values within them that, that the relationship between a man and a woman is through marriage, right? That we don't go, like I tell my son, that we don't touch girls, you don't go touch them, you don't shake their hands, you don't do any of these things with them, right? I mean, so like it starts off from that age that, there's a sort of an element of distance which is put into their mind. right? Because a woman is considered to be sanctified, that she cannot just be looked as an object, right? So I mean, I start at a really early age because I mean, I know the dangers. I've seen the dangers. I lived through the dangers, right? We went to school here. We know what kind of things are happening. So I mean, I don't think you can start early enough. But I mean, like for example, when a child is in fifth grade, they have something called like the fifth grade social, right? So those ideas, by the time they're 9 and 10 years of age, they're talking about boyfriend, girlfriend relationships, right? I mean, these are not things which are coming from within them. It's coming from outside, right? So we have to sort of be able to counter those type of things as before they actually start being penetrated in the person's mind. So if a child is being exposed to those type of things at the age of 8 or 9 years of age, then before that we have to go and instill and talk to them about maybe not in a very intense manner, but in a very light manner, begin to talk about these issues that, there's a distance that we have. We don't talk with them. We don't, shake hands with them. We don't, these are important that they start, this starts from an early age. The second part of the question was, what do you do if a child has already engaging in these type of things? See, when it comes to with children, I mean, parents need to have like an open mode of communication, right? They need to be able to talk with them, explain to them what our values are, what our beliefs are, not get emotional, not get, irrational, not get angry, not raise our voices, right? The child should be able to come to, the parents and express what's going on in school, right? A lot of times, when children, they see certain things happening in school, they come in to ask their parents, and the parents, they get angry. What is this nonsense? Don't talk about this in the house. And I mean, the next time something happens, the child is not going to come in and speak to the parents about that, right? So I mean, important thing is about communication. Talk to them about the proper values that we have. And if a child is engaged in these type of activities, then it's necessary to give them a different outlet. Put them into sports, put them into a book club, put them into different activities where they don't continuously do those types of haram acts, right? They don't get involved in those haram activities. I mean, there's a lot of things that are there, but I mean, a lot of it goes back to the parents. As long as the parents are talking to the children with reason, with logic, without emotion, then that child is more prone to accept them. And the house has to be a place of stability, right? If a child doesn't have stability and joy and happiness within the home, then they're going to go outside of the house and look for joy and happiness and stability. And I mean, we know what's going on outside, right? I mean, we see what's happening in schools, we see what's happening in the malls, right? So if we cannot make our homes an oasis, a place of peace and tranquility and serenity, then it's not surprising that children go outside of the house to look for happiness, to look for acceptance, right?
So I think, you're starting as early as possible. It doesn't have to be like, we think, okay, there's like age where it becomes very explicit. No, it can just be very generic, very basic. And then as they get older, you basically give to them what is appropriate for their age. And so that way you're preparing them from a very young age for what the world basically, the dangers that exist and the situations which exist. Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake that a lot of parents make. And I remember one time at a masjid, we were doing a program and we were speaking on homosexuality. And it was interesting because some of the organizers, they said, okay, well, what is the age group? And he said, well, anything, 12 and 13 and above. And they were kind of concerned. They said, we think that 13 is a little bit too young to be discussing issues like homosexuality. From our perspective, that's already too late, right? Because kids are getting exposed to these things much, much earlier these days. From their perspective, they were thinking, okay, this is too early. From our perspective, we're thinking they're already in the thick of things. A lot of times we tend to wait too long. And I think there's that idea of not my kids are pure, my kids are this,
Yeah.
and
Actually, we have a hadith about this, right? It just came into my mind where it says, "Badiru ila awladikum," go early to your kids and talk to them. And then the hadith talks about, some of the fringe groups that are there, like marja'a, right? Go and talk to your kids about our beliefs and our values before, the marja'a and other extreme groups are there, before they start giving them thoughts and ideas in their minds, right? I mean, it starts at an early age, but it has to be, relevant to their age. It has to be munasib. It has to be, particular to their age, right? Obviously, we can't talk to them about something extreme when they're 5 or 6 years of age. But we have to start. We have to begin having that type of discussion with children.
Beautiful point. Beautiful point. Seyed, I want to shift gears here. One of the phenomenons that we have, and this may be a West Coast thing. So I hope East Coast, they don't get upset and they're like, we don't do that. That's not us. But West Coast, we have this phenomenon where men mostly, so the women are not as involved, but men mostly, what is happening is marriage is getting delayed. And what is happening is instead they're saying, okay, well, we don't want to get married because of all these issues that we've been discussing, right? But what they're doing is they're replacing permanent marriage with temporary marriage. And what is really happening is, is what I call, Sharia compliant, right? So they're taking a non-Islamic concept of boyfriend and girlfriend, right? So exactly the same as what everyone else is doing. And then they just kind of make it Sharia compliant by performing temporary marriage. And they say, okay, well, it's halal, and not just as a halal, but it's good, X, Y, and Z. And it's interesting because one of the things that I've begun to see is that for people who would get into this in a serial manner, right? So they get into one temporary marriage for a couple of months, and then they get into another one and another one. And what tends to happen is these girls are not religious, right? They're not, obviously they're not devout Muslims, but they're not even devout Christians or Jews. They're not religious people, right? They don't really care. And so what I've begun to notice here is that people who would fall into this, they would begin to move away from religion overall. And so I could literally see it that, as the months go by and the years go by, because of all this time that they're spending with these irreligious people, they begin to become less and less religious. Eventually they stop coming to the masjid. And this has become almost like a lifestyle choice. Is this also happening in the East Coast, or, is it common? What's going on in that regard?
The extent of it, I'm not sure how much of it's happening. I know there are a lot of haram relationships which are happening. I guess one of the benefits of coronavirus is that people can't go and pursue those type of things, right? Everyone's socially distant from one another. It is a phenomena where people are going and having illegitimate, relationships. And in this case, which you described, they're using, a temporary solution for something which is permanent, right? Temporary marriage is for a temporary period of time under certain conditions. So we have to understand the context of that, right? A person's primary goal should be to have stability in their life, should be to have, a good family life, should be to have, a family and children, right? That should be a person's goal that they should be trying to achieve. One of the dangers that comes out with this type of behavior, like you described, it makes them irreligious, right? And when a person gets used to and habituated to this types of behavior, then it's not possible for them to get married permanently, and that's really sad, because they've accustomed themselves to so many different features and so many different experiences that when they do decide to settle down, then they're not happy with their partner, right? So, I was used to somebody who was like this. My previous partner had these qualities and had these features, and this one doesn't have it. She had eyes like this, she had hair like this. Why doesn't this one have this, right? And it leads to a lot of frustration, and when that frustration in marriage, it extends to the kids, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, after a certain point, maybe a person can go and do this several times, but after a period of time, they want to have that stability. They want to settle down. They want to have a home. They want to, because a person, when they get old, right, they don't want to be alone. When a person is 50 or 60 years of age, they want to have a partner, right? I was reading this study. They were saying that the women who suffer from the most depression are those who are 50 and 60 and divorced, because they don't have any partner, right? Because at that age, everybody requires companionship. So maybe at this point, when they're in their 20s or 30s, they may think they may get away with this, but later down the line, there's serious consequences that are going to be there, right?
Definitely. There's no doubt. So I just wanted to, clarify too that, temporary marriage does have a place, right? There are, within our school of thought, it is something which is allowed, and there are times where it is beneficial. But I think, and the point that I just want to clarify here is that it was not designed to take the place of permanent marriage. And I think what's happening is that people are looking at all these different issues and they're saying, well, I don't want to deal with the issues of permanent marriage. And definitely it has consequences.
There's a phenomena which is going on where youth are going and getting married and their parents don't even know. They have no idea that their child is that their child is married, that that their child has in a relationship, not for a couple of days, for years. In some cases, children have gotten married, had children, and the grandparents don't even know that there's grandchildren that are involved. In some cases, the parents are looking for for a spouse for their child, not realizing that that person is leading a double life. That person's already married.
Surprise, mom and dad.
Yeah,
Right.
one time, come bring the grandchild. This is your grandson. This is your granddaughter, and that's a failure. That's
I always say, if you close the doors to halal, then expect that you've opened the doors to haram. And I think that's a phenomena that I've been seeing, is that parents make it so ridiculously difficult. And this is not Iran, this is not Afghanistan, this is not Iraq, where the whole society is Muslim and marriage is easy. It's relatively difficult finding practicing spouses, right? It's not something that it can just happen at the drop of a pin. And so I think parents, they make it exceedingly difficult in regards to all of this stuff, like education, in regards to the wedding. And that's something that we might get into later. These ridiculous, it looks like a Bollywood movie, right? Without, of course, inshallah, without the dancing, right? But it looks like a Bollywood movie. It's like, what's going on here? And all the kinds of characteristics. It has to be a doctor, has to be a lawyer. And suddenly, when they show up with their grandkids, right? Or it's like, mom, I'm pregnant, dad, I'm pregnant. Right. Then they blow a gasket that, I didn't raise you like this. I didn't do this. Well, when you close the door to halal and you make it so difficult, then you should have no other expectation than these kinds of things. In fact, I would be surprised if that kind of stuff does not happen. That's where I would be surprised. Say someone asked a question, and this was asked a while ago. Is it okay after 30 to just give up, especially when you're not at risk for zina? Is it okay just to kind of give up on marriage?
No, I mean, a person should never give up, right? I mean, if anything, a mu'min is like kal jabal, right? It's like a mountain. A believer is like a mountain. They're resilient in the face of hardship and difficulty, right? Person cannot get discouraged. Person cannot, feel unhappy that things are not going to be working out in their favor, right? One of my favorite ahadith from the Prophet is tafa'alu bil khair tajiduhu. Anticipate that something good is going to happen, tajiduhu, that you're going to go and find it, right? A person should never become hopeless and despondent that, hey, I've reached this age and I can no longer get married. No, they should always be looking. They should always have that in their mind. And of course, wasta'inu bis sabri was salah, right? They should be patient. They should do dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and talk to family members, talk to friends, put themselves out there that I'm looking for marriage. I mean, there's no fadila. There's no merit in not being married. I was just reading one of these books, and it was talking about Nabi Isa, and why Nabi Isa didn't get married. And so it was talking about, from like an irfani spiritual perspective, that Nabi Isa, every prophet had his own spirituality, and so Nabi Isa, his spirituality was very much focused on the next life, very much focused on the akhirah. Right? And so because he wasn't connected to the material world, to the physical world, he had a detachment from this world. And then very interestingly, the author, Allama Tahrani, he drew a comparison to our prophet. That our prophet is the khatim, right? He's the seal of all the prophets, and he has a completeness of both the akhirat as well as this world, right? Of the physical world and the metaphysical world. So he encompasses both. He was more jami' in that sense. So thus the Prophet, he got married, in this world, and of course his focus was also there in the akhirah, right? I mean, there's no fadila, there's no merit in remaining unmarried. A person should look, even if a person, if they become a widow, right? They should look for marriage, right? I mean, everybody requires companionship. It's necessary for their iman. It's necessary for their own psychological needs. So I mean, even if somebody's in their 50s and their 60s, and they've lost their spouse, they should go and they should look for it, right?
And as you mentioned, there's a spiritual aspect as well, that sometimes, people may even be over the age of having kids. Someone might be 40 years old, 50 years old. Even then, there is that spiritual aspect, which is important. The second part of the question, though, it was also very good. And it was, how do we stop people from being nosy, right? So there's one component that, okay, well, you're doing your thing, and that's your own personal life and whatnot. But I think we see a tendency where our communities tend to be very nosy. And this extends beyond just being married, right? So if someone is not married, they'll kind of come. And I remember a sister had posted on Facebook that someone had told them that, I don't remember the wording that had been used, but almost like your produce, you're about to expire. And they were very offended. They're like, look, I'm a human being. Like, you don't know what's going on in my personal life. And even beyond this, sometimes people, they can't have kids. Right. And then everyone is asking them, hey, like, so, when are you going to have kids? And it becomes a torment for these kinds of people, right? That they're trying, that, they would love to have kids, and they're looking at everyone else who has kids, and then they're not able to. And then people keep mentioning this. So I think this goes back to kind of the collective akhlaq of our communities, which is very important.
Yeah. I mean, believers should be supportive of one another, right? They should encourage one another. We want to make a vibrant community, right? We don't want to have toxicity in our communities. I mean, these type of unnecessary comments are very detrimental, and people need to avoid it. Unfortunately, it's a reality where people are, like you said, very intrusive, right? They want to find out what's going on, what the problems are, right? Because it goes back to the ego. The ego needs constant chatter. The ego needs constant stimulation. So it enjoys these types of conversations and these types of of information you hear. I mean, we as people who are in this spiritual journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should at all costs avoid it. And if we see it, we should reprimand them. We should say this is inappropriate. You don't have a right to say these types of things. I mean, if they're saying in a positive manner to encourage them, then that's good. That we can't disagree with. But a lot of times they're just very obtuse remarks, and there's no place for that, like you said, in our collective akhlaq. And then a lot of times these same people, then they don't want to come to the community, because then they start to feel as if they're being judged by the community members, as if they're inferior, right? And that leads to a lot of problems down the line.
Yeah, I think, especially when it's something like not being able to have kids, right? There's couples that are childless, and it's already a wound. And every time, I think people don't really realize what that must feel like, that every time somebody asks them, when are you having kids? It's almost like they just ripped off that scab, right? It's almost like they made that wound fresh again. And these things, they have consequences. We oftentimes think it's just words. But in the akhirah, Allah is going to ask you. He says, you hurt this person. You hurt these people. Why were you not more careful in regards to these words that you said?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest sins is idha al-mu'minin, to torment another believer, right? I mean, to hurt another believer's, in a hadith al-Qudsi, it says that a person who torments a believer, it is as if they're coming to fight with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, who can fight against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I mean, it's impossible, right? The hurmatul mu'min akbar min al-Kaaba, that the sanctity of a believer is greater than the Kaaba, right? I mean, we know how much we adhere and we love the Kaaba, and we kiss it, we wouldn't tolerate any type of desecration. This is hurmatul mu'min akbar, right? It's greater than the Kaaba, right? So I mean, it's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to be watchful that we don't even sometimes inadvertently say these type of things.
I think it's easy for us. We see alcohol, for example, as a very big haram. We say, wow, astaghfirullah, right? We see lying, for example, as a big haram. We see, maybe, working for a defense contractor which makes weapons as a big haram. But I think when it comes to just these little things, we just think we're just talking. We're just making conversation. We don't realize the kind of effect and the kind of hurt that we're causing to others. And it would not surprise me on the Day of Judgment, these are the things that will get us. Because many times we tend to stay away from the big obvious harams. Like, we're not going to go and drink alcohol. But then when it comes to things like the tongue, qiba, and speaking to people about these kinds of issues without thinking about the consequences, a lot of times we don't think about that. I can just imagine on the Day of Judgment, this is going to be one of those major things which is going to come back to haunt us.
Yeah, I mean, the things that we need to be afraid of are the small sins, the small sins which accumulate, and they're going to be, they're going to be a big problem for on the day of judgment, right? I mean, something that, we need to take into account, when we speak. And I mean, it's good to encourage people. It's good to tell them, may Allah give you the best. Inshallah, whatever Allah desires, He's going to give you. May He give the best for you. May He provide the best for you, right? Those type of things are important that we say because it gives them peace. It gives them serenity, right? I mean, that's what, dua for another believer is highly recommended because it gives them a sense of solace and tranquility, which is there, right? So instead of like saying these type of things, why don't you go why'd you stop at only one kid? Why don't you have a second kid, a third kid? Islam recommends, so having kids, and why are you going against the teachings of Islam?
Seyed, another topic, cultural barriers to marriage, and this is kind of an interesting one that back home, if you're in Iraq, if you're in Iran, this is not even a part of your thought process or anything like that. You're going to get married to, if you're in Iran, you're going to get married to an Iranian. If you're in Iraq, you're going to get married to an Iraqi. One of the unique things, which is, it's both good, but it also presents a set of challenges, is that when Muslims immigrated to the West, now you have this very small population of believers. At the same time, you see that we're split up into maybe 5 or 6 different ethnic groups. And one of the things which I've heard this from parents, this is very common, and it sounds almost halfway legitimate. They say, look, when it comes to marriage with a person of another culture, there's going to be issues. There's going to be cultural issues. There's going to be, they say language issues. What is your opinion on this? What do you think?
I mean, listen, in every relationship, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be some conflicts, right? If 2 Iranians, if 2 Indians, if 2 Sayyids, I mean, every relationship there's going to be challenges, right? In one case, it may be caused by cultural. One case, it may be, akhlaqi issues, right? So I mean, issues and problems. This is a reality of our life. We're never going to have a relationship that is void of all conflicts and difficulties. I mean, one of the things that I find here, especially in the West, is that especially the elder generation, they hold on to their culture very much so. I mean, it's very dear to them, and to them, their culture has become synonymous with their religion. And I mean, I think trying to protect our culture here, it's almost something which is futile. We're not going to be able to preserve our culture. It's maybe some aspects, some words, some phrases, some foods, some types of clothing. Those things, they may be preserved, but at the end of the day, maybe not this generation, but the next generation, they're not going to hold on to these values anymore, right? I mean, what's important for us to focus on is that they hold on to their religion, right? We shouldn't make cultural issues into issues unnecessarily, right? And I think this goes back to a lot of times the parents. I think the younger people who are growing up here, they're sort of, America is sort of like a melting pot, right? Especially for us as a transition generation. We're neither fully American, we're neither fully Iranian. We're somewhere like in between the two. Like we don't really have a very strong culture. We connect to some aspects of maybe our back home, but then we connect, I think, more so to the culture which is over here. We need to take into account our future, right? And our future is our religion. Making these issues cultural, language, I think it's unnecessary, and that we should try to avoid it. And let's see.
Yeah, definitely. One of the interesting things that I always try to mention is that when children are born in the West, and this is something which is a little bit difficult for the parents to understand, is that your kids are essentially Americans. When we look at it from a cultural perspective, from a language perspective, really, growing up, we'll throw out something like jokes. So Iranians, they have a style of joking, and Americans have a style of joking. I don't get the Iranian style of joking at all. Right.
Yeah.
But what I do get, and the way I joke is that American style, in terms of the language that we speak, in terms of the cultural references that we understand. It's a little bit difficult. And yeah, we're not 100% American. We're something in between, as you were saying. But I think it's really important to recognize that when you are raised in a place, you are from that place. And this is a whole different discussion on identity. And I think it's something which needs to be explored, that the kids that are being raised here, are they Americans, or are they, for example, Iranians or Iraqis? And I think you can make a very good argument that they are primarily Americans.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so when I hear this argument from parents in regards to, for example, well, you're Iranian, you have to marry an Iranian, it's a little bit of a moot point, because really, you're not an Iranian per se, right? So
yeah,
you could marry someone of an Arabic background or someone of a Afghan background. Why? Because you speak the same language.
yeah, yeah.
You
That's
you
right.
you you joke to the same jokes. You watch the same TV shows.
Yeah,
And so you have this very powerful cultural background which exists. And I would totally agree. Like if someone was living in Iraq and they go to Iran and they don't speak the language, and they don't understand the culture, they're going to have a rough time.
yeah,
Right? They're going to have a rough time. But here we have this kind of unique situation that's so radically different. And I think parents, if they really want to protect and save their kids, they have to let go of this idea that my kids are Iraqi just like me, my kids are Iranian just like me. And, if you can get them married to, someone from the community, the Iraqi community, it may be stronger. I'm gonna concede on that point, because, you may have connections with their parents and it may be easier to get them married. There's no issue. But if you can't, I think it's important to be willing to let go of that and understand that your kids, they identify with a completely different cultural understanding of who they are.
yeah. I mean, it should not be a limitation, right?
Mhm.
I mean, right now we're in a very desperate situation where if our kids go and marry, another pious practicing person, then that's good enough, right? I mean, we live at a time of an age where if a person goes and gets married to the same gender, it's a big deal, right? I mean, what to say about all those things? But I mean, these shouldn't be. You're right. I mean, these shouldn't be limitations which are there. I mean, it's funny, when I first went to Iran, and the comic part which you talked about, right? I mean, we grew up here, so we're used to like, American comedy, American way of joking, right? And I remember like when I first used to go to Iran, when I was first in Iran, they would say jokes, and I was like, that's not funny at all. What are you laughing at? I remember like one time, like they used to take the siesta in the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
So one of the teachers, he used to go into one of the classrooms, and he used to go to sleep. And before he used to go in, he used to say Shab Bakhair. And I was like, that's not funny. What are you saying Shab Bakhair for, right? I mean, it didn't click to me that oh, he was taking a nap, so he's saying Shab Bakhair, right? Because it doesn't
Good night. Yeah.
it's not part of my culture. It's not something which I find humorous, right? But the kids who grew up here, they're watching the same shows, they're getting exposed to the same ideas, right? They understand Islam in the same language, right? They can talk to one another with the same emotion. I mean, like even now with my kids, I try talking to them in Urdu, I try talking to them in Farsi too, and they refuse. They don't. They're like, they only speak English. They're like, what's that? What you're saying? They don't want to. They don't want to even accept that, right? However much I try to push them towards those type of things, they're moving away from it, right? So it's something that we need to understand, that especially going towards the future, as long as two people who are compatible, they're spiritual counterparts for one another, they share the same values, they share the same future, they have the same outlook, the same worldview, the same goals that they're trying to achieve, and we should try to encourage them in getting married, right?
That was a beautiful point you made about Prophet Shoaib and Prophet Musa. I hadn't even thought about it in the context of a intercultural marriage, right? That you
Yeah.
have one individual coming from Madain in Iraq and another individual from Egypt,
Israeli.
right?
Yeah. He's an
Totally
Israeli. Yeah.
different cultures. And
Yeah.
so really we're looking at something which is not just an intercultural marriage, but a marriage where Musa, he doesn't have any money either, right? So when he's coming, he literally doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
The dua that I'm in need of anything that you can send me in terms of khair.
Yeah.
And then Allah, for example, he grants that dua, and then the women come back and they take him home.
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting perspective.
Yeah, and then Nabi Shoaib accepted him in the house. He lived there for like 10 years. He employed them. I mean, these are lessons that we need to learn from. I mean, Islam didn't find any objection to this type of marriage, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting also in this story that, according to some riwayat that I've seen, that it was recommended by the girl to go employ him. I mean, the Quran mentions that, but there's a sense of like the girl is sort of initiating the marriage.
She's
And that's
pushing it
something.
behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah, pushing it behind the scenes. Hey, this person, he's trustworthy, he's strong, he's productive. Bring him, employ him. I mean, for now, if a girl goes and initiates a relationship, it's considered to be like scandalous.
Yeah.
Especially imagine if this is a prophet's daughter who's going and initiating this relationship. And I mean, those are a lot of cultural things which are there, which need to be broken down. I mean, Islam has accepted it, with the marriage between Prophet and Lady Khadija, it was initiated by Lady Khadija. She saw somebody, and she saw this personality of the Prophet who's trustworthy, who's honest, right? She saw these noble qualities, and she herself was attracted, and she went and she proposed, I mean, a lot of these cultural values, they place limitations upon us, and I think, inshallah, overall, the future generations, they're going to break through them, and and that's necessary, especially for the well-being and the religiosity of our youth. These need to be broken. And I think, I mean, we're just in a transition phase right now, right? We're going through a little bit of a bumpy road, but I think future, inshallah, we're going to have Muslim Americans who share a very uniform culture, right? I mean, most of the youth that I know, they attend English lectures, right? Because they don't understand Arabic, they don't understand Farsi, they don't understand Urdu. Their preference is English, right? And so in that English lecture, you have Arabs, you have Iranians, you have Afghanis, you have converts, you have people from all different backgrounds who are making their own culture, right? That's what's going to happen in the future. That this generation, as it proceeds, they're going to be making their own Islamic culture in America. And that's something which we should appreciate, right? And that's something which has happened throughout history, right? When Islam spread from Arabia to different parts of the Islamic world, when Islam came to India, when Islam came to Indonesia, it took on a different flavor, it took on a different color, right? And all of those things are considered to be okay, right? Islam doesn't oppose any of those things. And I think eventually that's also going to start happening in America, where a new Muslim culture is going to form here in America. And let's try to make it as smooth as we can.
Inshallah, yeah. And I think open-mindedness, a look to see what is effective and what is not, it's really going to help really the mental well-being of our children as well. That easier that we go on these things, or the easier that the older generation goes on these things, just the smoother that transitional process will be. Sayed, qualities to look for in a husband and wife. How do you vet candidates? Just in terms of the advice that you give to someone who's trying to get married, they're trying to say, look, I haven't been married before. What is it that I really need to focus on? And then what are those red flag warnings that as soon as I see that, I run the other way?
Well, I mean, before a person goes and starts looking for marriage, they also need to know themselves. I mean, that's a very important thing. If a person doesn't know themselves before they get married, then they're going to get into a relationship and they're going to be very confused. So, I mean, like, I always advise that when they get married, they should have a good understanding of their own self. They should have a good understanding of their own personality. They should have a good understanding of what their future is, what their goals are, what their values are, right? When they understand themselves, then when they go and they approach other people, then they can easily find somebody who's a little bit more compatible. I mean, some general things that we should be looking for. I mean, the first thing that we should be looking for is someone who shares the same faith as us, right? We should look for somebody who's a Muslim. We should look for somebody who believes in the wilayah of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, right? We should look for somebody who's righteous, somebody who's pious, somebody who's upright. We should look for somebody who's not, who's not arrogant. Like, one of the biggest red flags is the moment we see somebody who's arrogant, somebody who talks with hubris, somebody who thinks themselves as a macho man, right? I think those things are run away from that. When you notice that when they start talking, they always talk about themselves. I did this, I did that, I went to school here, I worked here, I drove that car. Right? The moment you see that they're always talking about themselves, then I mean that's a big red flag. I mean, a person should have humility, right? I mean, unfortunately, we live in a time and era where good qualities are now considered to be bad. يَرَوْنَ الْمَعْرُوفِ مُنْكَرًا, right? They see good things as munkar, as reprehensible things, right? So when for example, a guy is humble, a guy is timid, he's not very talkative, he's not arrogant, he's not egocentric. Like, people mistaken that for somebody who's insecure, somebody who's weak. Hey, the person is exhibiting, Islamic qualities of being humble, of being simple, right? I mean, those shouldn't be misconstrued to think that, he's somehow weak in his personality, right? I mean, those are things which are praiseworthy, and we should be, when we want our daughters, when we want our children to get married, we should look for those types of qualities, right? I mean, there's a whole list of things that we should look for example, a person who's agreeable, somebody who's not always trying to argue. I remember one of the hadith, it says that when you look for a person to get married, that she should be azizatun ala ahliha, should be beloved to her family. Her parents, her mother, her father, her siblings should really love her, right? Sometimes we see that parents are hesitant to give away their daughter. That's actually a good sign, because it shows that, you know, they actually love that child and they don't want that child to go away, right? Especially for a daughter. A daughter has a very special place in her father's heart. So if we see that even there's some hesitation for, you know, a parent to, you know, to marry off their daughter, that's actually a good sign. It shows that she's aziza. When you look to get married, try to look for qualities that you want your children to have, right? What qualities that you want your children to have? Like those qualities that you want your son and your daughter to have, try to look for those qualities in your potential spouse, right? So I mean, those are some general guidelines. You know, try to talk to family members to determine what kind of a personality that person may have. Don't marry somebody who's condescending, somebody who has bad relations with their own mother and father. That person should be stayed away from. You know, I mean, I remember a brother, he once contacted me, and he said he's getting divorced. And when I asked him that, you know, did you talk to her before marriage and stuff? He's like, yeah, you know, I did, and I thought she was a good girl, and you know, she was from a good family. And he's like, you didn't have any red flags? He's like, well, I had one red flag, and that red flag was once when I was talking to her on the phone, her mother was calling her, and she started yelling at her mother while she was talking to me on the phone, like in an abusive manner. I mean, that's a huge red flag. If a child doesn't have a good relationship with their own parents and with their own siblings, then that's a sign that they're not going to have a good relationship with their spouse. Their marriage is not going to be healthy. It's going to be a miserable marriage. It's going to be a very toxic marriage. So I mean, so there's a lot. Maybe we can have another session to talk about those things. But also, you know, from when looking for a guy, when looking for a son-in-law, for looking for a guy for your daughter to get married, somebody who's capable, somebody who's strong, somebody who's productive, somebody who has a sense of accomplishment, somebody who wants to achieve things, right? Those are really important things to look for, right? Strength is both spiritual as well as physical, right? Nabi Musa, he had physical strength, which was displayed, but he also showed that spiritual strength by, you know, by walking in front of Nabi Shu'aib's daughter, right? He showed that spiritual side of his, that, you know, he saw when they were at the watering pond, he saw that, you know, the two daughters of Nabi Shu'aib were just standing there. They were waiting for, you know, all the men to leave, right? And he saw this injustice which was happening, that, you know, these women, they didn't get a chance to go and get water. I mean, that's a sign of spiritual strength, that when it comes to dhulm, when it comes to oppression, when it comes to something being unfair, that a person doesn't tolerate that, right? It is a lot of things, but inshallah, you know, if we have another session, then I'd love to sort of expound and
Definitely.
expand on that,
It's
inshallah.
definitely a very comprehensive topic. You know, one of the things that you touched upon, this idea of modesty, and I was just thinking about it, that how much, you know, I think we've really lost this characteristic of modesty, that, you know, in previous times, I think people had a better tap on it, both for males as well as for females. But this concept of modesty is something that we should really be looking for. That is an individual modest, you know, in the sense, you know, when we talk about this concept of haya, you know, this concept of haya, it's defined as a sense of shame in terms of sinning before Allah. That's really, you know, how haya is defined. That when it comes to a sin, the person feels the sense of shame before God.
I mean, we tend to have haya when it comes in front of other people. But like you mentioned, haya in front of Allah is more important, right? When we're by ourselves, when no one's around, that's when the haya really counts, right? And that's something that we should be trying to have, haya and modesty and chastity when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching. And that's all the time.
Most definitely. Here, I just want to mention, you know, before we go on, if anyone has any questions in regards to any of these issues that we've been discussing, please feel free to ask, and we will answer them as we go along. Moving along to the next issue, you know, we were kind of touching upon things which are red flags. So as soon as you see that red flag, run the other way. A lot of times people are not running the other way, or they're not picking up on these cues. And so what we're finding is that our communities are getting hit pretty hard with divorce. And unfortunately, by the time the couple comes to the local sheikh, the local scholar, you know, by the time they might go and start to get counseling, really the majority of the damage has already been done. And that's kind of what we're coming across and what we're finding. So I just wanted to kind of open this up, that what are the things that you would look into in terms of the factors which lead to divorce? If we could, say the top three, the top four.
I mean, there's a lot of things. The first thing is, to have good akhlaq with one another, right? To have a sense of respect for your spouse. I think one of the problems one of the things that leads to divorce is when there is a breakdown of respect, of mutual respect between the husband and the wife. When the wife doesn't respect the husband, and when the husband doesn't respect the wife. We should always try to speak to our spouses in a manner where that respect is maintained, right? We don't make judgment calls on their personality. We don't call them abusive names. We don't make judgments on their personality. I think that a lot of time it really hurts a person when they feel as if a person who knows me so well and so intimately, they think of me in such a low and unworthy manner. I mean, just having basic akhlaq, making sure that we control our tongues, making sure that we don't label others. We don't, call them lazy. We don't call them, something, which will hurt their feelings, right? I mean, these are like basic things, but these are things which over a long period of time, they add up and they lead to, a lot of divorces.
Obviously before marriage, there's that honeymoon period where everyone tends to be on their best behavior, right? Because they want to get married. They don't want to do anything to jeopardize that. But I think once the marriage happens, there's this kind of thought process that, well, I got her. Or the girl's like, well, I got him, right? And there's no escape. And so now I don't need to be, for example, polite, or I don't need to be courteous, or any of these things. And we begin to take one another for granted. And I think that's one of the causes of this issue. And these little things, by themselves, it might not be a big deal. Sometimes we might joke with one another in a way which causes just a little bit of hurt, just a shadow of hurt. And at the time, just that single incident doesn't mean anything. But when you're living with someone, right, and these things accumulate time after time after time, year after year after year, this is what we're kind of seeing. Suddenly 10 years, 15 years down the road, we're like, whoa, what happened? You were happily married. You had 2 kids, 3 kids. And now suddenly you can't stand one another, and it's reached this boiling point. Another characteristic which is very beneficial, and this is beneficial just across the board, but I don't know why it's very difficult for us to do this, is just praising one another, saying things, doing things which raise one another up. That when someone does something good, whether it's your wife or your husband, or it's your friends, or it's your family members, praise them, right? Yeah. Praise them publicly. Say, wow, you did an amazing job. You did something really amazing. I'm really proud of you. You've done something beautiful. A lot of times we, whatever it is, we're like, well, it's my brother, it's my wife. They already know that I'm proud of them. They already know that, I support them, and we don't verbalize these things. And so then people, they're living their lives and they feel unappreciated.
Yeah.
And that's such a tragedy, because just with a word here, a word there, a gesture here, a gesture there, really you can build people up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which cause, marriages to disintegrate and fall apart is inattention. The husband doesn't give proper attention to the wife doesn't give proper attention to the husband, right? Even like you mentioned, like small gestures of love, those go a very long way. There's a hadith from the Prophet where he says, tahadu tahabu, that give gifts to one another. And what will that do? That'll create a love and compassion and affection among one another, right? I mean, something simple, right? You go on a trip, get something small to, to show that, you were thinking about your spouse. I mean, it goes a very long way, these small things that we do are important, right? And these small gifts, like Imam Khomeini, one of the things that he used to do, he used to write poetry to his wife, he used to write letters to his wife, I mean, these are examples that, we have to try to, we have to try to inculcate within ourselves. And they go a very long way, in order to create a healthy marriage, but also a healthy family life, right? With the children, with the kids. I always say that a problematic marriage will lead to problems with the children. If a husband and wife don't have that love and affection with one another, then that's going to extend to the kids. Right? If the husband and the wife have a strong relationship based on love, based on affection, based on iman, based on lifting one another up, then that same relationship will transfer will extend to your children. Children will have that relationship with their parents and among one another as well.
It's interesting you mentioned this. I remember I was speaking with someone who had been very successful in her life, and she was explaining. I was asking, what was it that kind of gave you this ability to be so successful? And she said something very interesting. She said, "My dad always supported me. My dad, he really believed in me." And it's just something simple, like the dad would just say a few words here and there. He would show his appreciation. He would encourage his daughter, and there was this really amazing cumulative effect over all the years that now this woman feels like she can conquer the world. She can achieve all of these great things. And she did. She went out and achieved a number of successes in her life. And, a lot of times just going back, just a small word here and there, we don't recognize the value of these things. Sayed, there's a hand that's raised from Brother Ali Abid. He's asking a good question. He's saying, doesn't everyone have some sort of a red flag or things that someone may not like in a potential partner? And if so, basically, so people who do have red flags are never going to get married. What will be the outcome of a society like this? Would you like to answer this, please?
Well, it depends how big the red flag is. I mean, if it's a small, minor foible, right? I mean, everybody has character flaws, right? I mean, we're not going to find Mr. or Mrs. Perfect, right? I mean, that's just impossible. We're all fallible. We're all, errant human beings, right? We all have issues, right? We all have problems. None of us are perfect. But I mean, some issues are very big, are very, detrimental. So I mean, it depends on the size of the red flag, the size of the problems that they have. I mean, like, for example, somebody who's been married, unmarried, they're on their third, fourth marriage. I mean, that's a bit of a red flag right there that, there may be some issues with them, right? So, I mean, it's also one of the problems when people are pursuing marriage. They try to find out all of the information about their partner before they get married. And, if that's the case, then no one is like the brother said, no one is ever going to get married, right? You can always find flaws with one another, right? We should try to overlook those flaws. Like, we have a hadith which say that if a person has a flaw, bring up 70 excuses for them. Don't be quick to judge them, right? Maybe they were justified.
I think one of the things that is important is when looking at the ahadith, there's two things that I just see repeated over and over again, and that's when you're looking for a spouse, and that's that sense of religiosity and the akhlaq of the person. These two, they seem to be the two main things. And I think when we say red flags, we mean like major issues which are going to be foundational. Definitely, we all have these little flaws, right? We have these little issues, and no one is exempt from that, right? We all have that. But I think what we should really be careful about are these major foundational issues. And so, for example, going back to that issue, if there's any issues with the person's religiosity, like, for example, you see, he doesn't really care about his prayer. He might be missing his prayers. That's a red flag. Even if he's telling you, no, like, I'm trying, and like, okay, well, fix your prayers first, right? Because if you're not doing your prayers, then that's a huge red flag, right? If you're not doing it for the sake of God, you're not going to be doing it for the sake of your spouse. Akhlaq, going back to that issue, if you're short with your parents, right? You're yelling at your parents. Chances are this kind of a person, they're not going to change for you, right? Yeah. So if you see them yelling at their parents, most likely they're going to be yelling at you in the marriage, and that's going to cause these kinds of issues. So I just wanted to mention that, definitely, we all have these like little character flaws, and that's going to be a part of being a human being. But what we need to look for are those foundational issues, which right off the bat, it's going to start weakening and then eventually destroying the foundations of that marriage. And
if a person knows themselves, they may see certain attributes in that partner which may be problematic for them. Like, for example, suppose a husband, suppose he's always traveling, right? His job demands him to travel, every other week, right? And if a woman, she knows that that's difficult for her, then she should know herself well enough that this is going to be a problem for me. This type of marriage is not going to be fulfilling to me, right? If for example, if someone goes and marries a doctor, doctors, they have to go and work long shifts. They may not be home, right? So the most important thing is a person should know themselves before getting in marriage. They should know what they want. They should know what complements them, right? And if they know what qualities are important to them, then when they look for their spouse, and they're able to determine which qualities are livable and which qualities are able to live their life with.
Without a doubt. This is also an interesting question. And Brother Ali Abed, he says that I've heard from multiple cases of religious couples that they get divorced. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that really any guarantee of, how long a relationship will last? Whereas we find like the atheist couple who they're happily married for 50, 60 years, and there is no religiosity in that relationship. So can we really say that religiosity is the right criteria?
I'll let you answer that, Sayyid.
Yeah, I suppose this was the point that I had made. I was hoping you would answer it. But so,
We'll pass this one on to you.
it's a really good question. There are always going to be outliers, right? So you're always going to find people who they may be religious, but for whatever reason there is some issue with that relationship, right? So they could be religious, but maybe career comes in the way, right? That it's very possible the husband could be a doctor that is always working, right? And there's no way to get out of that, for example. The wife may have specific situations. The akhlaq, the behavior may be in a certain way where they're both good people, but it just doesn't mesh. And we saw this during the time of the Holy Prophet. There was believers, there was good people who they would get married, and in spite of being believers, it just wouldn't work, right? There was some mismatch of their akhlaq or their expectations, and this does happen. At the same time, we got to look at the average, right? That if you're a religious person, right, one of the most basic criteria that is going to guarantee the success of your marriage is going to be that idea of religiosity, right? Because if you hold to religious values and that person does not hold to religious values, this is really a foundational problem that you're going to have in your marriage. That when kids come along, for example, we were talking about people marrying Christian and Jews, and doing this on a long-term basis and then having kids. Okay, well, there's going to be a major issue that when you have kids, do you want those kids to be raised as religious Muslims or as religious Christians, right? This is going to be a really important issue. So I think here it goes back to this foundation. All right, Sayyid, we are moving towards 8 o'clock, which was our time. So Brother Khalid, he asks, how important is it for the wife to wear makeup for her husband? So let's broaden this actually, because this was actually one of the topics that we were going to discuss. We didn't get to. How important is it that male or female, you make yourself attractive for your partner? Because one of the things I've noticed is that as soon as that aqd takes place and the marriage takes place, there's this feeling of, I gotcha. Right. And now I'm going to eat barbecue ribs and I'm going to gain 50 pounds. I don't really care about how I look or how much of an effect do you think that has? Is it minor? Is it major? And how important is it to beautify yourself for your spouse?
It's a good question. I mean, it's necessary that, because we as human beings, we have different types of needs which need to be fulfilled. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed that within us, has placed certain physical needs which need to be fulfilled. And, we should try as loving partners, as loving spouses, to try to fulfill our partner as much as we can within the boundaries of Islam, right? So when it comes to, for example, dressing up or applying makeup, I mean, all of these things, they're permissible. And, a person should do it. And it goes for both sides. It goes for the husband. It also goes for the wife. So that means the husband should also, like you said, the husband should also be fit. The husband should also be, active. He should be energetic. He shouldn't be, a glutton sitting on the computer all day, right? He should be strong. He should be masculine, right? A lot of times, like you said, in the beginning of marriage, a lot of attention is given to this. But then after a period of time, it begins to slowly, diminish. It gets less and less. And these are things which actually keep the marriage going, right? They reinforce the marriage. I was reading this hadith that from the Imam where he says that one of the dangerous things that people they get into is habits, right? They get into these habits where they just do the same thing over and over again. And he mentions that people should break their habits of doing things, right? They should try something new. They should try something different, right? It sort of goes back to how strong their personality is, right? And how committed they are in order to make their marriage and relationship work. So I mean, these things, absolutely, a person should always be presentable. A person should always wear things which are appealing. I think that was from Imam Sajjad, where Imam Sajjad was wearing something red. And some of the companions, some of the people who were there, they came to him and they asked him, why are you wearing something red? And so the Imam, he replied, he said, because my wife likes it. So, I mean, it shows that even in a public manner, he's expressing himself in a manner which his wife likes, right?
And
So
Sayyid, we have to put this
yeah,
in the perspective of that time, right? That time, it's like, who cares what, your wife likes it, who cares, right? It was a very, very different society than we have today.
yeah. And the imams are giving attention and importance to those type of things, right? So I mean, we should keep that a priority in our lives, and we should try to satisfy and please our partners as much as possible within the confines of Islamic Sharia and Islamic law.
Definitely. There's another question that was sent. And this is the question of what is the Islamic view on the division of chores and housekeeping? And I get that it's the responsibility of the husband to provide and that it is not an obligation on the woman to keep the house tidy. But beyond the wajib and the obligation which the Sharia gives, what should that look like from a religious perspective?
Um, I mean, when we look at Islam, we don't want to look at the baseline of Islam, right? We don't want to look at, what is the minimum which is required, right? Like when we look at, for example, our salat, I mean, our salat, if it was to be just the pure minimum, it probably takes 10, 15 minutes a day, right? I mean, and the same thing when it comes to marriage. If we look at the bare minimum that we need to put into a marriage, then that's not going to be a successful marriage, right? Sure, by Islamic law, there's certain things which are obligated on the husband, for example, to provide nafaqah, to provide some type of, to provide financial support when it comes to housing, when it comes to clothing, when it comes to food. And then the woman, she's not obligated to cook or to clean. She can even actually go and charge her husband for doing these types of things. But I mean, those things are absolute baselines, right? And we shouldn't try to, like, for example, we take an exam. I don't know, what is passing these days, 65, 66? Right? We shouldn't try to aim for just only 65, 66. We should try to go up and beyond, like aim for 80, aim for 95, aim for 100, right? We don't want to come to the core minimum which is required, right? Division of responsibilities. I mean, it's important that before marriage happens, that there's pre-marriage counseling, and that these issues are discussed, right? What are the expectations from the husband? What are the expectations from the wife? If the husband, if the wife, she wants to finish her university, if the wife doesn't want to have kids till later down the line, right? I mean, these type of things, they need to be discussed from beforehand. If the husband, he expects his wife, for example, to cook food, every day, to keep the house clean. I mean, those expectations, they need to be spoken about, right? And the division of responsibility. I mean, I don't think that there's something which is clear cut. That like for example, in the life of Imam Ali and Lady Fatima salamullahi alayhima, both of them, the Prophet came and he divided the responsibilities. He gave the responsibilities within the house to Lady Fatima salamullahi alayha, and he said whatever responsibilities are outside of the house, bringing in the food, bringing in the firewood, bringing in water, right, bringing whatever necessary supplies, he delegated that to Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, right? But we find that Imam Ali, that he used to come and in the house and he used to help Lady Fatima. He used to go and he used to sweep the floor, kana yaknus, right? He used to go and he used to sweep the floor. He used to clean the house. I remember there was this one story where the Imam, he used to help Lady Fatima in the house so much that even like the lentils, he used to clean the lentils which are there, right? So that division of responsibility is not something which is, which cannot be bent, right? We should go and try to help and assist one another. The Prophet, he used to come and he says, Ya Ali, anta ni'ma zawj, right? Because he said, you're the best of husbands, right? Because you help your wife so much. You go above and beyond to try to make her life easier, right? So, I mean, a lot of these things, they need to be discussed before marriage. These responsibilities need to be explained beforehand, that I have this expectation from my partner to take care of these responsibilities.
Beautiful point, Sayed. Definitely, definitely. These are important, aspects of Islamic law. One of the things that for myself, I really began to pick up when I went to Qom is this idea, we have this idea of the Sharia. And one of the important aspects of the Sharia is that it's the very outer limits of halal and haram. And a lot of times people, they look at it as a type of ideal that, for example, the Sharia says this, and it is the ideal, without realizing that, no, it's not the ideal, right? There's in fact something else which is it goes even higher than this. The Sharia is simply telling you that when you go beyond this point, you fall into sin. right? And when you go beyond this point over here, then, for example, that's halal, that's allowable. But really, if we want to live those lives as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we have to go way beyond just those bare limits of what is halal and haram. And so I think, because I've heard this kind of talk before that, well, as a woman, I don't have an obligation to do this. Well, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to live the lives, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt. And so we see the way that they were living their lives. And a part of, a happy and healthy life is a healthy type of division of labor. That the man is going to be doing certain things, the woman is going to be doing certain things. And we see this in life, like, as you mentioned, the life of Fatima Zahra and Imam Ali alayhi salam. It was really a very apparent, aspect. But they didn't just stop there. It wasn't just like, okay, well, we've divided it and I'm not gonna help within. No. There was that aspect where the Imam would also help. And so I think it's really important for us to realize that, the Sharia, sets out the limits of what is wajib and what is halal and what is haram. But at the same time, we want to go way beyond that, and we want to do everything to have an ideal type of life, much, beyond that aspect of just the wajib and the haram. The biggest issues that come up is not that one person is doing one thing or not doing the other. I think is that issue of expectations. A lot of people, they rush to get married without really discussing these kinds of details. It's like, okay, well, I have these kinds of expectations. I have these kinds of ideas in my head. They don't discuss these issues. And then post-marriage, these things, they begin to clash. I've seen cases of, for example, a woman is a doctor, right? And she goes and she was a doctor before the marriage, right? They get married. And now the husband has an expectation that she's going to be a housewife, whereas, for example, before she was working full-time. So these things, they really need to be discussed. Like, don't wait post-marriage and then suddenly say, well, I married you as an engineer and you were working all this time, and suddenly I expect you to quit your job and stay at home. These were issues that should have been discussed way before, that marriage took place. And so really, I think it just comes down to communication, and that's the main thing which is going to help us get through these kinds of problems. And they're very basic, it's not rocket science, unfortunately, but as a result of a lack of communication, I think we're running into these issues. And then eventually these issues are leading to divorce in our communities.
Yeah, and expectations, they also change, right? When a person is, when they first get married at 25, 26 years old, 26 years of age, they have some expectations. And then when they're 35, when they're 40, when they're 50, right? They have expectations. They change as a person proceeds in life. And like you mentioned, a very important point, as long as they have that communication, a communication which is devoid of hostility, of judgment, of a condescending manner, right? Then they're able to help fulfill one another's expectations, right?
Sayyid, thank you once again.
Thank you for organizing this. Allah rewards you.
Inshallah. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات تابع اللهم بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا محافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. Inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins, to forgive our flaws. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our marriages healthy. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our children righteous and pious. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the dhuhur of our Imam and make us among his righteous supporters and followers. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen.